Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Python Exchange. My name is Cameron Riddell, and I will serve as our host for today. As you all may know, our goal is to have Python thrive within the National Lab System and its affiliated research sites. And in support of that goal, today we are joined by a very special guest, Maxime Liquet, who brings a really unique perspective to the Python community. And since 2021, Maxime has been a software engineer at Anaconda, where they maintain and improve the open source data visualization libraries of the HoloViz ecosystem. Before that, they actually worked as a civil engineer, specializing in flood risk assessment, and so they know firsthand how much good data and good communication matter. But before I speak any more about our guests, let's also give an opportunity to introduce some familiar faces, our host panelists, who will help us drive our discussion and answer questions today. Let's start with James Powell, and then we'll ask Dan, and then we will also ask Eugene to join us. So James, can you mention very briefly what it is that you do and what types of questions you'd love to help us answer today?
Hi, everybody. My name is James Powell. I work together with Cameron on a variety of projects as well as some training deliverables. One thing I would love to help answer for everybody is, as a scientist, how do new AI and LLM tools actually make a difference in our work? Do they or do they not? Is this all hype or is there something real?
Fantastic, James. Well, it's always a pleasure to have your opinions and insights here with us every month at the Python Exchange. Next up, we also are joined by Dan Allen. So Dan, the same question to you. What is it that you do, and what are the types of questions you'd love to help us answer today?
Sure. So I work at the Giant X-ray Beam, National Synchrotron Light Source 2, leading the data engineering group. And thinking about today's talk, I'd love to talk about how we structure documentation so that many different kinds of users can quickly find what they're looking for.
And Dan, very quickly, I want to follow up on that. Many different kinds of users. Are you talking technical users or non-technical users, or both in this case?
I reject the dichotomy. I think with this, the scientist and the software scientist, and everybody's a different grade in between, and their feeling about what they are might depend on what their situation is in the moment, right?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's not binary here, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic. Well, last but certainly not least, from our host panelists, we are also joined by Eugene. So Eugene, the same question to you. What is it that you do, and what types of questions are you here to help us answer today?
Sure, thank you, Cameron. My name is Eugene. I work with Dan Allen at NSLS2, also in data engineering group. Mostly I work on code development for our data management system called Tiled, and also integrating it with our data acquisition system called Blue Sky. As such, I'm not really involved with anything related to visualization so much, but I would really love to learn how can we improve, or how can I improve some visualization of the actual processes that happen in Blue Sky and Tiled with HoloViz.
Excellent. Well, Eugene, it is a pleasure to have you join us. So glad that you could make it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Now, let's get back to the person of the hour, our guest panelists. Today, they'll be talking about something that often gets overlooked, but can really make or break an open source project, and that is documentation. Specifically, they'll share how their team has applied the Diataxis documentation framework to strengthen two HoloViz libraries, hvPlot and Panel, and along the way, they'll highlight some lessons learned, pitfalls to avoid, and how clear documentation can turn users into contributors. And so, Maxime, at this point, I would love to turn things over to you, give you full control, and you can share with us all of the thoughts that you prepared on the Diataxis framework for your documentation uses.
All right, thanks, Cameron, for the very nice introduction. Let me share my screen and let's get started. All right, give it a second. My talk today is called Better Dogs, Happier Users, what we learned applying Diataxis to HoloViz libraries. So Cameron already introduced me, but just as a kind of small disclaimer is that I am not a tech writer. I'm a software engineer, and so I don't spend my whole days not spent writing docs. I don't have a like deep experience in that. So everything I tell you today is really this experience we got over the last few years using this new framework called Diataxis. And the talk is laid out as kind of a little story. It starts pretty bad with some problems, and the biggest one being like our dogs needed some love. Then it gets better. We find this framework called Diataxis. Then there's the action part of the movie. We implement the framework on 2 libraries, and then the lessons learned. So the cast, Panel and hvPlot, these 2 libraries are part of a bigger ecosystem called HoloViz that is really dedicated to making data visualization in the browser, in Python, easier, more powerful. Basically, you shouldn't have to leave Python to do simple and complex visualization. So there are many libraries. You can visit the website, and the project as a whole is sponsored by Nemfocus and also by Anaconda, because many of the contributors, but not all, work at Anaconda. Panel first, so that's a library that was created in 2018. It is a framework to build data apps originally, but in general, really just web apps. And it is pretty similar. Most people, or many people, know about Streamlit or Dash, or there's Voila, and there are many others these days. But Panel is one of the original ones. It's the most popular library of the HoloViz ecosystem. And hvPlot was created about around the same time. And hvPlot really is like a kind of a small plotting library. It is simple and powerful plotting based on the pandas.plot API. It doesn't apply just to pandas. So if you have you use Dask, GeoPandas, Polars, Xarray, you can use hvPlot with these libraries. And it not only is inspired by the dot-plot API of pandas, but it extends it, it supercharges it with many features. And I show you there a little example. You can see that with a very simple call, just an import compared to pandas code, you create a plot that is a bokeh plot that is interactive instead of the matplotlib static plot you get with pandas. And the last character is Diataxis. So that's a systematic approach to technical documentation authoring. It is pronounced Diataxis. I have pronounced it Diataxis for the last 3 years. I just learned when I was preparing this talk. So I'm probably going to say it again, and it's fine. And it's from ancient Greek, dia meaning across and taxis arrangement. But I will tell you more about the framework soon. So the problems. First, kind of a meta problem is that documenting open source projects is hard. You don't get much funding to document open source projects. Finding contributors is hard for that. You will have contributors that contribute that fix typos, or maybe they enhance a little bit, but like a large refactor or someone who really has a deep experience in writing docs, that's going to be very challenging to find. And then developers don't like writing docs, question marks. So this, I leave it up to you to answer this question. And I know personally what I found challenging with docs is that it's context switching. It is a different mode of working for me compared to coding or all the things you have to do as a maintainer. And it's a mode in which I need to spend some time before it kind of flows and I feel comfortable. But by the time I get there, I have something else to do and I have to, and so it doesn't work so well. Another problem is something I've called the user guide party gone wrong. So a very common layout for websites, and especially I think in the Python space, is that you will have a getting started, you will have series of user guides and an API reference. And when the project is small, the user guides are kind of small, simple and ordered. You just follow them. It's just nice. But then as the project grows with time, it adds new features and new user guides, and some are advanced user guides, and they're kind of mixed. And you end up really in a bit of a messy situation with all these user guides, and like a mixed kind of content. And so that's not great for users. They wonder, do I have to read all the user guides? Like, is there really an order there? So that's not great for them. It's also not great for contributors. They don't really know where, to put something if they want to contribute. And maybe like the easiest thing would just be to add a new user guide for a new feature, but then you just contribute to the mess. And so the last problem really is that we knew our docs needed some love because we are users of our tools. But a couple years ago, we ran a survey and asked HoloViz users what development activities would help you most right now. And clearly the answer was that people wanted better documentation. There was a clear signal to us. And more specifically, Panel is a pretty large framework. It's kind of like a batteries included library. Has a lot of features, so that's challenging to document. Also, it's in a space that is really competitive with Streamlit and Dash and others. And these other projects, we know they have good docs, and we felt a little embarrassed that our project, the library, has so many features and it's a good project, but really the docs was not serving the user to the level it should be. And Panel was definitely suffering from a growing number of messy user guides. hvPlot, well, was actually kind of in a worse state. It had no API reference. The user guides had mixed content. There wasn't really a clear learning path and no examples gallery. And for visualization projects, it's very common to have a pretty extended examples gallery where people can just go and look for the kind of visualization they're after. So the solution is this framework called Diataxis. It's a guide to help you author technical documentation. The visit is at diataxis.fr. If you're interested in this guide, I recommend reading it. It's very well written, obviously, and very well structured. It was created by Daniele Procida. Sorry if I butcher his name. That is someone who is involved in the Django project. He's a very active member in the Python community, and he's a director of engineering at Canonical. And I don't know him, but I say a few things about him because one reason we picked this framework a few years ago was that we saw some adoption of the framework in the Python community, in the Python space. And I think one reason that this framework has been adopted, is that it's good, but also because it comes from the Python space. It looks like 10 years in making from what I could see, but it has really been formalized and named Diataxis in 2021. What I really like about it is that it's very pragmatic. There is a theoretical foundation. You can read about it on the website, but you don't really have to, understand everything. You can just go apply it pretty quickly. And it's been adopted, so yes, by Python projects, but not only, like far beyond. Like if you visit, I don't know, GitHub's website docs, you'll find they follow Diataxis. And if you didn't know about the framework, with what I will tell in the talk, then after that, when you will visit websites, you will immediately spot whether they use the framework or not. That's going to be pretty obvious. The main concepts are, first, documentation is not one thing. And it's true as a maintainer, also like a user of documentation. You don't really have a mental model for it. It's like, oh, that's documentation. And the framework really tries to make you think of it like, no, that's not just one thing. I will tell you what it is. Also something quite, obvious maybe, like documentation must serve the needs of your users. And the whole framework is based on decomposing that. And documentation, what does it do? It serves like a skill. For instance, you visit Python's website and you're learning and maybe using, and it's all about your skill about writing Python code. And the framework says, okay, a skill has kind of two main dimensions. One is action cognition. So this is the difference between doing and knowing, the practical steps and the theoretical knowledge. The second dimension is acquisition, application. So the difference between you're at study and you're at work, or you're learning and you're using. And so based on that, the guide provides a mapping from user needs to types of content. So here they are, these 4 different types of contents, and I'm going to put the dimensions here again. And just to make it simpler, let's just look at like the vertical dimension there. At study, so you'll find 2 types of content, tutorials and explanation. And at work, you're going to find how-to guides and reference. And I'm going to tell you more about it. Let's start with reference, which is when you are at work. Yeah, at work. So reference is pretty simple. You know about it. That will be your API reference and a few other things. It's information oriented. It's like the technical description is complete, reliable, neutral, austere. It's kind of boring, but it's very important. You don't usually read the whole reference. You consult it. And an example would be like, kind of extended Wikipedia page about something. How-to guides then are goal-oriented. They address like a real-world problem, and they don't expect the user to. They expect the user to already be competent. You're not, they don't start from zero. You assume they start from a certain place. They know already some stuff. For documentation, it's a good goal to have a rich list of how-to guides. It shows the breadth of your project to your users. And an example would be a cooking recipe. Explanation. So now we are in the territory of like learning. It is understanding oriented. This is where you provide context, background. You answer questions like why, how. You kind of elevate yourself compared to the other types of categories. You establish connections between things. And here, a simple example would be an article about why do we crave chocolate? And finally, tutorials. And I put tutorials last because this is the most challenging type of content to author and to understand. And the Daniele Procida, the author of the framework, I saw in videos from him that he said about 80% of your time should be dedicated to writing tutorials, like on average. It just shows like they are challenging to write. And so what is a tutorial? A tutorial is a lesson. And so something I kind of learned is like compared to the 3 previous types of content, so reference, how-to, and explanation, these three types, you can write them as the developer of a project, as a contributor, as a user of a project. The tutorial, you have to become a teacher. That's the main difference, really. You have to be a teacher. You're going to teach someone, except you're not sitting with them. You're not in a classroom. You're very far from them, and you just give them some kind of static content that is documentation. In this tutorial, you should not try to explain. That is actually very difficult because you, as someone who's writing a tutorial, for sure you have understood a lot of things. You have abstracted many, many things about the project. And this is how you get it. You have abstracted all of that, and you want to tell people that, all these abstractions. Unfortunately, that's not how people learn. People learn by doing. And a good example of that would be so easy if you could read a book about mathematics and you would learn mathematics. That would be magical, right? But that's not how it is. You have to practice, you have to exercise. It's kind of physical, the way you learn mathematics in the end. And it's exactly the same for any kind of project. And so yes, a tutorial has to be designed in a way that the user can do something. And what it must, in the end, it must inspire confidence, it must be an enjoyable experience, and it must result in success. These are like 3 key elements that you should try to reach with the tutorial. And an example would be someone baking a cake for the first time. It doesn't really matter, they understand, learn everything about the, doesn't matter at all actually, about the physics and chemistry of what happens, when they bake a cake. Instead, they must have fun. And in doing so, they will actually learn quite a lot, right? And a final last word about Diataxis. It is about the structure. And so what it says is that you should use it as a guide and not a plan. And so when you see these four main categories, right, tutorials, how-to, explanation, reference, kind of naturally, you see four buckets or empty buckets you want to fill, with content. And there's this quote in the guide that says, "It certainly does not mean that you should create empty structures for tutorials, how to, reference, explanation with nothing in them. Don't do that. It's horrible." I put that quote because I find it quite funny. But yes, don't do that. Instead, what should happen is that this is really like this is a guide, and this is a mental model you should have. And when you are looking at existing documentation, or when you are writing a new documentation, think about what needs does it serve to the user, and then you're going to map that to a category, and then kind of writing this content, the structure should emerge from that. And in the end, it is true, many websites that follow and adopt the Diataxis, they will have this structure, like their top level structure is going to be that, but that's not a strict requirement. You can have maybe in one page, you can have many how-to guides, you can have one explanation and one reference, as long as you kind of tell the user, oh, this is where you are, you're in a how-to, you're in an explanation, this is fine. Okay, so the action part now, the implementation. So we started with Panel, and a big motivation was the 1.0 release a couple of years ago. There was a team of 3-4 contributors. I was not part of them really, I was more an observer there. So they adopted the top level structure, part of this release. They created a few explanation pages. They didn't create any tutorial. And really what they largely focused on was to breaking down the user guides into how-to guides. So they had a sort of mapping exercise where, okay, this user guide is going to become these how-to guides, and maybe maybe a few explanation pages. They distributed the writing among all the contributors, and each how-to was short and focused, as they should be mostly. And then when they finished all of that, they removed all the user guides. So just a few lessons learned immediately from that was like, well, that was pretty much a complete docs overhaul in one release, which for sure came with some stress. It was quite a lot to do. And so the lesson is gradual releases for the win. This is also pretty clearly, explicitly stated in Diataxis. And rightfully so, they would never say, okay, you have to change completely your documentation to adopt the framework. And that would be pretty impractical for large documentation, right? And I think with Panel, we were at the level where, wow, that was quite a lot already. You don't have to do that. You can just change gradually, and release as you go. All the user guides were removed in the 1.0 release, and there was no tutorial. And so what happened is that we actually kind of lost the learning path there. I say almost because there was still a getting started tutorial, but it was very small. And before that, the user guides, at least the first one, were ordered in a way that was, that's how we expected people to learn, to discover the library and learn concepts. And so we lost that, and for about a year. And then Mark, who's a very active member of the HoloViz and contributor to Panel, made a massive push and created super good tutorials that were released. But for about a year, we lost a learning path, really. And I think the outcome there was like, okay, we should have just kept the user guides, maybe arranged them a little bit, but well, they could have stayed there, as and when we added the tutorials, we could have removed them. Then, so more recently, actually, we started at the beginning of the year working on hvPlot, and we were lucky to get a grant from NemFocus And so if you are, yes, you should look into them focus. And if you're a maintainer of Python library, they are great, and you can have this kind of grant that allows to do this kind of work. The team was Azaya, who's a contributor from Nigeria and who is an excellent writer, and myself. And something we did before starting is that we have this tool, this service in place that is called Goat Counter. It is similar to Google Analytics without cookies. It's free, it's open source. And it allows us to see, the number of visits on our pages. And so we could rank them, and we could also see what people searched on the website, and that allowed us to prioritize work. We started with writing getting started tutorials, but actually pretty quickly we felt blocked, both Azaya and myself. And so we quickly moved on and focused, and there was a pretty large focus on the reference, which didn't exist. So we created an API reference and documented methodically all the options of the hvPlot interface, and there are like literally hundreds. Then we added a new gallery, and I spent some time like scratching my head, like what kind of content is a gallery, in the Diataxis framework. And I figured that this is actually a how-to kind of content. And figuring this out, it helped also writing the content of the gallery. And we started breaking down the user guides, and this is work that is still in progress, and we haven't released yet. So the lessons learned with hvPlot, well, maybe don't start with the tutorials. They are challenging and you can get blocked. The reference is the foundation. I don't know if it's true for all projects, but it's clearly true for hvPlot. It's definitely helping users having very good reference, but it's also helping people writing docs, because then you can link easily to the reference and where you should. And also when you're writing docs, you don't necessarily know everything about the project. And so you can just have a look at the reference, and it makes writing all these other kind of documentation, types of documentation easier. And yes, it takes longer than planned, but this is probably true for every project in the world, right? And so as a conclusion, so yes, Diataxis works. That's been our experience in these two, with these two libraries. We definitely have a better user experience. I'm a pretty heavy user of Panel myself for work I do at Anaconda. I love the how-to guides. I think there are about 200 of them. Like pretty much any answer I have when I develop an application, any question I have, I find an answer in the how-to guides. So that's great for that. And we also, as a consequence of adopting the framework, I think we have also a better contributor experience. And to take the how-to guides again as an example, it's pretty easy for a contributor to spot a gap in the how-to guides. They struggle doing something, they find out, how to do it. And it's easy to contribute a how-to guide. It's usually quite short. They have a lot of examples, to like kind of templates around. So yeah, definitely better contributor experience. Yeah, tutorials are indeed challenging to write, and I'm not sure there's a way around that. It's kind of a craft to be a teacher, and probably by doing more and more of it, you get better at it, at least I hope. You will get the feeling that you repeat yourself, and it's okay. And let's take, for example, like a major feature of a library. It's very likely it's going to be in a tutorial. It will have multiple how-to guides. It's going to be, of course, in the reference. And if it's a little complex, there will be an explanation or two about it. But in these different categories, what you will write is always going to be slightly different. If you write exactly the same thing, there's something wrong, right? But it's always going to be a little different, and that's okay, And I emphasize that because as a developer or someone writing code, you really try hard not to repeat yourself. This is something you have like kind of deep in you, and well, that's actually okay. Yes, links everywhere. It totally makes sense to link from the tutorials to the explanation. actually it's pretty good because you will have this urge in your tutorial to explain stuff. No, don't explain too much. Maybe just a little bit and link to a deeper explanation, or from a how-to to the reference. Help your users navigate between these different categories, these different sections. And a final last word is that I noticed we still had some debates in the team about how to apply the framework at some points. And this is, I don't know if you know, like this tool called Black that is a code formatter. And once you adopt it on a code base, then you no longer have any debates because you can't configure it. It's not quite the experience we had there, but I think actually for good reason, is that this was us learning about documentation. We pretty much had really kind of no clue, no mental model about it. It was kind of a little bit the Wild West, and it took some time, you know, for each one of us to um, to learn about the Diataxis, about the structure, about all of that, about these concepts. And with these debates, we learned. So that was actually that was a good experience. And I think that's all for me.
Well, fantastic, Maxime. Thank you so much for sharing. Why don't we kick things off with our Q&A and our panel discussion? So if you're in the audience, you have a Q&A widget. You also have the chat widget as well. If you have a question that you want our panel to discuss, please enter that in the Q&A. And if you have some comments, maybe some additional tools or links or references, you can use the chat for that. But I'll open things up for our panelists. Host panelists, do you have any first questions for Maxime? And James, I see that your hand is up.
I hate to be the person to ask this question, but I'm curious about the relevance of diataxis in our new era. One, for all the faults of your LLM, it is very good at style transfer and very good at summarization. Is it not the case that now we can only write one style of documentation and our end users may not even read that? They're going to read it intermediated by an LLM anyway. So why write all the different types?
I think I had a feedback from Mark, someone in our team, that improving the docs with these different kind of these different categories improved the answers he got from an LLM. They basically built a little MCP for HoloViz that was reading the panel docs and all the docs, and I think that makes sense that the LLM is also able to get that structure to be oriented the right way with the right kind of content.
Excellent. Anyone else on our host panelists here?
Partly, I want to argue with James about that. I think to elaborate on what Maxime said, I think that the different ways of expressing that information must reveal something about what's important about your project. The things that are in the tutorials are foundational and definitely what your project is about, and where somebody should start. If you ask an LLM to make a simple solution, it might draw on those things, whereas user guides are addressing something specific. So whether or not you're communicating that directly to the human, I would think that the structure would matter, because I don't think if you asked an LLM, take my messed up documentation site and convert it to Diataxis for me, that an LLM would be very good at doing that. And there's something that came out of the team arguing over how to do that well that would be hard to recover.
At the
I'm
same
curious what
time,
Maxime thinks of that too. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious for everybody, do we not lose some patience in writing documentation, understanding that it may be documentation that nobody ever reads, that the end users are so predisposed to asking the LLM these questions that nobody may actually go to the source documentation anymore?
Well, I can say from experience, for instance, with hvPlot, because the documentation was pretty, you know, not where it should have been, and it's not a super popular library, right? And not all libraries are very popular. Most of them, like hundreds of thousands of libraries on PyPI, uh, you know, are not popular. And I tried to actually use an LLM a little bit to help me write the reference, but it was pretty bad at it because it had really no clue. it was not specific enough about the things I wanted to write. So there was really failing at me. I think I certainly then, once the reference is in place, I can use it to write other kind of contents, this definitely. And I also think you need somewhere like a really good source of information for this information to spread, like kind of on the internet, basically. If you don't have a good docs, I don't really expect people to write good blogs, to make good YouTube videos. And so, that having that good source somewhere is important to me. And I mean, LLMs hallucinate and you get bitten sometimes, and you get bitten once, twice, and like, okay, I better double check what they say, what the other answers.
Absolutely agreed with you there, Maxime. I think since all the LLMs, right, are going to be trained on probably the bulk of the things you'll find on Stack Overflow, if you don't have a package that's widely used or has a lot of answers on Stack Overflow that are of quality, then it's not going to give you good answers. And at the same time, even projects that are huge and have been around a long time, like James, would you trust an LLM to write even 2 lines of pandas code for you? I would
No,
assume it's going to give me something horribly wrong.
but I don't know that I would trust my users to read documentation either. And I say this not to disparage the users. I'm a user. I don't really read documentation as much as I probably should. And then I go onto GitHub and I submit very nasty sounding issues that could be easily solved by reading 3 lines of the documentation.
I hope your issues are answered with just one hyperlink and no additional text. But Dan, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, did Maxime, as you were writing the documentation, did you find yourself realizing something was harder to explain or more annoying to express in the library than you wished, and going back and evolving the API?
No, I haven't had this experience in hvPlot, and I mean the things we need to improve, I already have all of them in mind,
Yeah, sure.
But yes, for instance, like writing the reference definitely helped improve the code. You have to have nice doc strings. You have to have nice signatures to have a nicely automatically generated API reference. So there was definitely improvement. And just to come back to the previous discussion, yeah, I said in the talk that we use this tool called Goat Counter, that is similar to Google Analytics. And what we've seen over the last year is that our websites are less visited. And so you can't really tell why, right? Is it because they are less popular but we have the assumption that it's, people ask LLMs more and more and they visit websites less, but they are still visited, right? And there are still people who are gonna read the docs, I hope.
I'm still a big docs reader, Maxime. To follow up, and then we have a couple of questions from the audience that I want to get to, but to follow up on Goat Counter, I'm curious, is there any part of the documentation that's visited most often? Like in the Diataxis, do you see one, like the tutorials visited the most or the least compared to the other 3 quadrants?
Well, I can't really tell you, I haven't checked that, but my guess would be the how-to guides, really. For panel, I can talk about panel more because it's been there for longer, but yes, the how-to guides are so rich there that and also we probably have more users, who are using the tool than learning it every day, right? And who visit the website. That's my guess. And so visiting more. I never visit the tutorials because they are not written for me. And rarely the explanations. But yeah, how to's reference. I would say how to. I should check.
Fantastic. I would agree that's probably a good intuition there as to which is going to be the most visited. But speaking of the Diataxis, we have a question from the audience, and it's asking about what assumptions should you make as an author when writing tutorials? Probably the trickiest type of thing to write. Should we assume that the audience has kind of knowledge of X, Y, and Z package? Like if I'm writing something for pandas, should I assume that you're already familiar with NumPy and arrays and things like that? Or should you assume absolutely nothing and always speak from the ground up, which might lead to very verbose tutorials that maybe your higher level users might skim through and say, oh, this is going to be a waste of time because it starts so basic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. Yeah, maybe because of the way I explained them in the talk, you can kind of easily think it's just for beginners, but not actually not. The starting point of a tutorial can be wherever you want, the level of your user, whatever level you expect from your user. You can have tutorials that are for absolute beginners. You can have tutorials that are for advanced users, and for instance, we can have one for building a basics panel app, and then another one starting from the basic app we built and adding more advanced features like authentication and other things like that, right? And another point on this question, when we started this whole work on documentation, we asked ourselves, okay, what are good docs we know, in the ecosystem? Like some good docs we could reference or we could have a look at and see, what do they do that is good and we could replicate. And a tool, website project that was mentioned, I think, by Mark and others was Fast API. And so Fast API is this like web framework, right? And it seems like it's kind of known for having good docs, but I don't really have anything, concrete to say that. But there was this like kind of rumor, right? And when you have a look at it, I like their docs because of that, because the way they write it, there is a tone and they really explain everything as if you know nothing about, you're really a beginner and there is really something nice about it. Like you feel they care about you. But that's more something like tone, I would say, It's a writing style, and the writing style is something the framework doesn't give you. The author of Fast API has a nice style. Doesn't mean I find their docs perfect. I talked about this user guides party gone wrong, right? I think Fast API suffers a little bit from that. It has many user guides, and it's like would probably deserve, be better following the Diataxis a little bit. But definitely their style is quite nice.
Fantastic. And that actually sparks a good follow-up also from our audience. This is to the entire panel. Which project, in your opinion, would you consider is kind of a gold standard, or maybe if not a gold standard, at least a good reference for good documentation? So Maxime, would you go with Fast API there for that?
I'm
Or
not
maybe
sure.
panel in this case?
No, I don't think we have reached that. I think we went from like meh to good, good, very good there, somewhere there, but excellent. I don't know. I have nothing that comes to mind really. Yeah, I think Fast API for the style. If you like their style, the emojis and the explanation, it's pretty good.
I do. So I remember when Panel did the overhaul for documentation and posted all about it on LinkedIn. And I do remember going to check it out. And in addition to the great categorization for on the Diataxis, the one thing that I love a lot that you all did was the interactive docs. I could click the play button and actually run the Python code in the browser. So this gives me the capacity to not just follow along with the tutorial, but I can then edit a line of code within the tutorial or within the user guide. And then I can see how that changes the output. And I don't need to download and install and then have all the lines of source code to help me out. So I think that's one key thing that I think is we're seeing on more and more Python projects, but I think Panel was one of the first major Python projects I've seen pick that up in their web documentation that I really, really love. Anyone else? Dan, Eugene, James, any project that you've seen that has good documentation?
I'm curious
Well,
what other things. Oh, you first,
I
Eugene.
just quick note. Yeah, it's kind of hard to think of any specific project from the top of my head, but I would maybe turn this question around a little bit. So when I look for some information on the projects or packages I'm working with, usually I look for references most of them. I would say maybe 70% of the time. And if the documentations have good references where I can follow what arguments are needed for that function, what should be the types, and so on, I'm pretty happy. The other case could be how-to guides and examples. For example, especially with visualization packages like Plotly or Pandas or scikit-learn, but those a little bit more, not just visualization, but for processing as well. How-to guides and examples are really, really good when you can see the produced outcomes and then dig deeper and see how to actually do that.
Yeah, and I think, Eugene, you've highlighted kind of at least the growth that I see when I approach new packages is I always will start off with those how-to guides / tutorials, just because maybe I have a task in mind and I'm just looking which how-to guide gets me the closest thing to the task that I have in mind. Then I can kind of edit from there. But if it's a package I've used 1,000 times, I'm never really reaching for the how-to stuff. I'm always reaching just what was the function call for that thing, or what arguments does it have? And I only start really reaching for the reference material. So I think it's good, the Diataxis there, to have those bases covered so that your documentation effectively allows your user to grow and have their needs shift as they develop comfort or familiarity with the package there.
I don't think I'm unusual in that I don't go to the homepage of any project to read the documentation. I go straight from search engine search to the individual page that I want to look at. So I don't think I've ever seen the Pandas homepage. I always go straight to whatever the search pulls up. But as a consequence, this creates an odd tension in the quality of the documentation whereby, on the one hand, the documentation, the actual link that surfaces is not necessarily what the authors had intended to be the link that surfaces. So there's a little bit of okay, which link is actually going to hit for a particular query? But also when there's inconsistencies in the documentation, it really, really hurts me. But at the same time, if there's not redundancy in the documentation, it also really hurts me because I'm not reading it linearly. I'm just going to one link here, one link here. So I need stuff repeated across random pages, but it also has to be very consistent across random pages, which certainly makes it a challenge for the authors.
Do you think maybe LLMs can help to reduce this kind of inconsistency between different pages?
I think that's the hope. You try and do something that, I mean, human being can't manage that kind of inconsistency.
Exactly.
It's very
Yeah, exactly.
difficult. Yeah.
On that note, Maxime, you mentioned that Mark was playing around with effectively an MCP server for HoloViz. Is there ever a plan to make that public facing, or is it just too soon to tell? Mark was just playing around having some fun.
Oh, he wanted to make a dev release pretty soon of that. It's available in a repo somewhere. It's pretty rough around the edges, I'm sure. But yes, it's a good way for projects like us who are not very popular, and we know the output of LLMs would be much better if it was driven by having actually the right content, in the prompt or somewhere. And yes, just because it was mentioned like consistency, yes, I think it would be good for new practices to emerge and tools, or maybe they already exist, or they probably already exist, but really to help maintainers, have their documentation more consistent by having LLMs go through them and, find add links between places that it would take a lot of time. You have hundreds of pages to go through, and an LLM could do a pretty good job at that, right?
I have a controversial statement. I think that there's a certain point in the authorship of documentation where it's worse than nothing. In other words, if the documentation isn't maintained and it's out of date, you just wasted my time. If you had no documentation, I would have figured it out myself. I just don't know where that spot is. And I think a lot of people who are writing documentation don't realize that they're creating a burden on themselves to keep this up to date and to maintain it over time.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's so controversial, right? I think it's spot on actually. And yeah, there's a thread there with LLMs, right? So easy to generate content. Just generate content, it's free.
Yeah, you ask and it provides. Is it good content? Usually not.
Mhm.
In that same vein, I am curious, Maxime, are there any workflows that you all use that help avoid the desynchronization of what's actually happening in the source code and what the documentation is saying? I know most people, if you make like a new feature, a bug fix, anything like that, they'll say, oh yeah, by the way, like make sure you also update the docs. But is there any, aside from this social convention of just remembering to do that, is there any automation or any tools that you all use or techniques at least to help make
Cameron,
sure that they're in sync?
the answer, Cameron, is don't write docs. The code is self-documenting.
It is Python. It reads very well, unless James has written it. No, I'm kidding. But
Yeah.
Maxime, you were saying.
Okay, maybe the only thing we use there is that most of our docs are actually notebooks. And so we run them like it's our test suite, right? We run the test suite and we also run all the notebooks. So that can catch regressions, like remove something in the API, but we don't remove the docs. But that's kind of probably not what you expect, right? You would expect something. And no, we don't have anything that just due diligence and okay, I know I have to update this part of the docs.
I like that. I like having the documentation be notebooks and be fully executable top to bottom, because at the very least, you'll catch your own errors or your own warnings, hopefully.
Yep.
Perfect. Now, Dan, I think earlier you were still pondering your favorite documentation. Is that right?
That's true. I wonder how does this fit into Diataxis and what we're talking about? There are two examples I can think of where the documentation is mostly a book that's trying to explain something to you that you haven't seen before. One that I've spent a ton of time with is Trio. That's partly documentation about the software and partly documentation about the idea of structured concurrency. And another example is 0MQ, which I was just revisiting, but that is a straight up like 100-page PDF, but it's very readable, and it sort of is a tutorial that gets into, it starts with a tutorial and gets you into more advanced use cases in a way that is easy because it is so obviously linear. And I think that's true of both Trio and 0MQ. You're not hunting and pecking. It's kind of like, you're not going to be able to drop in the middle of this. You've not seen anything like this before. Here you go.
I like that.
Is
So,
that-
Dan, do you
Should
lean
we
towards...
rewrite those docs as Diataxis, or how do I frame this as a question at
Mhm.
Maxime? Or
Mhm.
is there a different kind of thing?
I don't know if you, I'm not going to tell you to rewrite everything. Yeah, Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I like Diataxis, but I'm just trying to understand, I'm trying to think about together, what is it good at, and what's too different to fit?
I think for me, the highlight really with the Diataxis is like you think of different needs, and maybe you should think about these docs that you like. Do they serve all the needs that need to be served about a
Yeah.
project? Seems like they are pretty good at like understanding, learning.
Yeah.
How good are they for like when you're really using it and you get stuck in a problem, or you want to be, efficient when you are using the tool?
Right.
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
So kind of maybe if it ain't fully broke, don't bother rewriting the entire documentation for a particular project.
If I
But-
may squeeze in a closing question,
Yeah.
as somebody who notoriously does not like writing docs, like many people, don't just blame me. Let's say I'm willing to sit down and take an afternoon or maybe a couple of minutes. What is the absolute minimum I should start with that would be useful for somebody if I can't really bring myself to doing the enormity of useful work that you have done?
Something, well, what the framework says is really, I don't think there's, okay, let me.
And how do I not feel guilty about not writing docs? If you could answer that too.
Okay, not feeling guilty. That's a funny one. I also don't like so much writing docs, right? But I have to say, it is still a bit satisfying to do it, right? There's still something because you're serving people and you're gonna help them, and it's different compared to writing code, of course, but it's still a little satisfying. As to where to start, I think it depends on the project. I know, for instance, hvPlot when I started working on this one. hvPlot has a bit of a weird design. It's a flat API. So for a developer, it's a pretty bad design. It's a flat API, you call it, and you can, have like 200 keywords. It's pretty bad design, but it's very useful when you are doing data analysis in a notebook. You don't have to create many different objects. You have to combine. It's just one API call, one call. And so I knew the reference was very important. There are just too many options to document, and you want to do that right. For Panel is a framework where you have many different objects you combine. And so even if you have a good reference, the reference is going to be about that object. But how do you put things together, like interactivity between things? And there, I think that's why there was a large focus on the how-to guides. So I would say, I don't know if that answers your question, but it depends a little bit on your project. But something Diataxis says as well is that just start somewhere. Doesn't really matter. Start somewhere, pick a piece of existing documentation you have and think about it, like, what is it? What am I trying to do there? And arrange it a little bit better so that it serves one specific need. Maybe put it in another place where it's more obvious what it serves. And then go on if you have time and the will.
I like that. So if you don't enjoy writing documentation, treat it like exercise. Anything counts and anything will help. As long as you start writing documentation, other people will be able to use your project. Excellent. Well, that takes us to the end of the time that we had for our exchange today. I want to extend a huge thank you to Maxime. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and hopefully this won't be the last time we see or hear from you. And of course, a big thank to our audience, James, Eugene, Dan. Thanks for being able to join us and for your insightful commentary. And of course, one final thank you to our audience. We appreciate you joining in and asking the questions that you did in the Q&A to help drive our discussion even further towards the things that you care about. Next month, I encourage you to keep an eye out on our website. That's meetup.doepy.org, because we will have a jam-packed event for you waiting. So do keep an eye out on that website, because we'll be updating it with details for next month's event shortly. Thank you all again for joining, and I hope to see you all again real soon. Thanks, everyone.